Hey guys, tonight we're settling into something soft and familiar. The quiet ritual of the Sears catalogue landing on the porch, the smell of fresh newsprint mixing with the smell of supper cooking somewhere behind you. There was a particular kind of excitement in 1955 that had nothing to do with speed or convenience. The excitement of turning thick paper pages by lamplight, planning, dreaming, circling things in soft pencil. Before we drift into it, thank you so much to the viewer who asked for this one. You always find the corners of the past I never think to look in, and it means more than you know that you keep sending these along. If this kind of evening is one you enjoy, a quiet like or a comment cost nothing, and helps this little channel keep finding its way to people who need it. And if you would rather listen than watch, we are now on Spotify too. The link waits patiently in the description whenever you are ready. Now dim the lights if you have not already. Let the fan hum low in the corner, pull the blanket up over your shoulder, and let your body sink into the mattress the way it does at the very end of a long day. What did it actually feel like to hold that catalogue for the first time each season? What did the ink smell like on a cold evening in the kitchen? What did it sound like when the whole family gathered around the table, each person waiting their turn to look? What did your mother circle first, and what did you circle when nobody was watching? And just like that, it is 1955. The porch light is still on from last night. Somewhere down the road a screen door creaks shut. And on the kitchen table, waiting for you, is a catalogue thick enough to hold an entire year of wanting. Let's start with the mail. It comes heavier than usual, and you know before you even flip it over what it is. The postman has a way of holding it out with both hands, as if he understands, even if only a little, that he is not delivering paper today. He is delivering possibility. You carry it inside, pressed against your chest, the cover cool against your skin, the weight of it settling into your arms like something that matters. The front door swings shut behind you with its familiar creak, and for a moment you simply stand there in the hallway, catalogue held tight, letting the stillness of the house settle around you. Outside, the postman's footsteps fade down the walk, and somewhere a dog barks once, then quiets. You glance down at the cover, the same bold lettering you have seen every season, the same promise of pages waiting to be discovered. There is something almost ceremonial about walking it to the kitchen table, setting it down gently, as if placing something fragile, though of course it is only paper and ink. The kitchen smells faintly of the morning's coffee still lingering in the air, mixing now with the papery scent rising off the catalogue itself. You run your palm across the cover once, feeling the slight texture of the printing beneath your fingers, and for just a moment you let yourself imagine everything that might be waiting inside before you have even opened it. That is part of the pleasure, really, the imagining before the knowing. Your mother appears in the doorway, drying her hands on her apron, and her eyes catch the catalogue before she even says a word. There is a small smile there, quiet and knowing, the kind that comes from having done this same thing every season for years. She does not rush toward it. Instead, she finishes what she was doing, wipes the counter once more, hangs the towel back on its hook, all while the catalogue waits patiently on the table, as if it too understands there is no need to hurry. You pull out a chair and sit first, claiming the smallest privilege of having carried it inside. The chair creaks beneath you the way it always does, a sound so familiar you barely register it anymore. Sunlight slants through the window above the sink, falling across the table in a long, warm stripe that touches the edge of the catalogue cover, lighting it just enough to make the whole thing feel a little more important than it probably is. You open the cover slowly, the spine stiff and new, resisting just slightly before giving way. The first page holds nothing more than an introduction, a few lines of cheerful print about the season ahead, but even that feels like an invitation you're meant to accept slowly, respectfully, the way you might accept an invitation into someone's home for the first time. Behind you, the rest of the house continues on as it always does. Someone's footsteps cross the floor upstairs. A screen door somewhere down the block opens and shuts. The world outside carries on with its ordinary business, unaware that inside this kitchen something has shifted, however small. This is the beginning of weeks of quiet anticipation, though you don't think of it that way yet. Right now it is simply the catalogue and the smell of paper and the particular hush that settles over a house when everyone senses, without needing to be told, that something worth looking forward to has just arrived. Your younger brother wanders in eventually, drawn by nothing more than instinct, the way children seem to know when something interesting has entered the house. He leans over your shoulder without asking, his breath warm against your ear, and you let him look, though you keep your hand resting lightly on the edge of the page, unwilling to let him rush ahead to the toys just yet. There will be time for that. Right now, this first look belongs to whoever got there first, and today, that happens to be you. The clock on the wall ticks steadily behind you, marking a time that feels both ordinary and quietly significant. You are aware in some small way that this moment will not be remembered for anything dramatic happening within it. Nothing changes today. No decisions get made, no purchases get written down, and yet there is a fullness to it anyway. The fullness of beginning something, the particular satisfaction of the first page turned, the first glimpse caught, the first quiet promise made to yourself that later, when there is more time, you will come back and look more carefully. Outside the window, the afternoon light begins its slow shift toward evening, and still the catalogue sits open on the table, patient, waiting, exactly where you left it. You close it gently for now, not because you are finished, but because some things deserve to be returned to rather than rushed through, and as you carry it toward the shelf where it will wait until after supper, you feel that small, particular kind of happiness that comes only from knowing something good is still ahead of you, still unopened, still entirely yours to discover. It is Sunday afternoon now, and the whole house has slowed down around you. The dishes are done, the radio hums low from the other room, and the catalogue sits open across your lap like an invitation nobody needs to repeat twice. You do not rush through it. You let your eyes travel page by page, past the coats, past the tools, past the toys tucked into the back corners meant just for children. This is the kind of quiet that is harder to find now, an entire afternoon with nowhere else to be. The sofa cushions have gone soft beneath you, from years of Sunday afternoons exactly like this one, and you sink into them without thinking, the catalogue balanced comfortably on your knees. Somewhere behind you, your father has fallen asleep in his chair, the newspaper folded loosely across his chest, rising and falling gently with each breath. Nobody bothers to wake him. Sunday afternoons in 1955 carry their own unspoken rules, and one of them is that a napping father is simply part of the piece, not an interruption to it. The light through the window has that particular late afternoon quality, golden and slow, stretching long shadows across the carpet as the hours drift by unhurried. You turn each page slowly, sometimes pausing on something ordinary, a set of mixing bowls, a coat in a colour you like, sometimes lingering simply because the illustration catches your eye in a way you cannot quite explain. There is no urgency in any of this. Nobody is waiting for you to finish. Nobody expects a decision by supper. Your mother sits nearby with her own project, a bit of mending balanced in her lap, needle moving steadily in and out of fabric with the quiet rhythm of practiced hands. Every so often she glances over at whatever page has caught your attention, offering a small comment that would be lovely for your sister, or we already have one of those in the hall closet, before returning to her stitching without further comment. These small exchanges fill the room the way sunlight fills it, gently, without demanding anything. The radio in the other room plays something slow and orchestral, the volume low enough that it becomes less music and more atmosphere. A softer backdrop to the turning of pages and the occasional creak of the house settling around you. Outside, you can hear the faint sound of someone mowing a lawn a few houses down, the engine rising and falling as it moves back and forth across the grass, a sound so ordinary it barely registers except as proof that the world continues on exactly as it should on a Sunday. You reach the section with the furniture next, heavy wooden pieces photographed in rooms that look almost too perfect to be real, dining tables surrounded by matching chairs, china cabinets gleaming under studio lights. You imagine, briefly, what it might be like to have a home exactly like the ones pictured, though you know your own home, worn and lived in and entirely yours, holds something those staged photographs never quite capture. Further along, the pages shift toward children's clothing, small dresses and overalls arranged in tidy rows, and you find yourself smiling faintly at a particular pattern, wondering if it might suit your younger cousin's next birthday. There is no list being made yet, no firm decisions, just the quiet pleasure of considering possibilities one page at a time, the way a person might wander through a garden without needing to pick anything at all. The afternoon stretches on this way, unhurried, comfortable, filled with nothing more demanding than turning pages and occasionally exchanging a few soft words with your mother. Your father stirs once, resettles himself deeper into his chair, and returns to sleep almost immediately. The clock on the mantel ticks steadily, marking time that nobody feels the need to hurry. Eventually the light outside begins to shift, deepening from gold to something softer, signalling that supper will need thinking about soon. But for now, you remain exactly where you are, catalogue open across your knees, the whole afternoon having passed in the gentlest possible way, spent doing nothing more than looking, imagining, and letting the quiet of a Sunday settle fully into your bones. There will be other errands tomorrow, other obligations waiting just beyond today, but this hour belongs entirely to stillness, and you intend to stay in it a little while longer. Someone has already left a pencil beside the catalogue, worn soft at the tip from years of exactly this. You press it lightly beneath a photograph of a dress, or a fishing reel, or a set of dishes with a pattern your mother has been eyeing since spring. The circle is small, almost apologetic, as if wanting something out loud still feels like it needs permission. But it is there now, marked, remembered, a quiet little promise to yourself. The pencil itself has a history you have never really considered until this moment. Its wood worn smooth along one side from years of being gripped the same way by different hands in this same kitchen. Your mother used it last season, and her mother likely used one just like it decades before that, sitting at a table not so different from this one, circling her own small wants in the margins of her own catalogue. There is something comforting in that thought, the idea that this exact motion, pencil to page, quiet decision made in soft graphite, has repeated itself in this family for longer than you have been alive. You turn back a few pages to double-check something you noticed earlier, flipping past the section on outerwear, past the pages of practical work boots, until you find it again, the small teapot with the painted flowers along its side. You hover the pencil above it for a moment before finally pressing down, the circle forming slow and deliberate, not the quick scribble of impulse, but the careful mark of something considered. Your younger sister leans over from the other side of the table, her own eyes scanning the page upside down, trying to catch whatever it is you've marked. She giggles when she sees it, teasing gently about how many teapots one household really needs, and you swat her hand away without much force. both of you laughing quietly in the way siblings do when the joke isn't really about the teapot at all. Further down the table, your mother works through her own pages with more restraint, pencil hovering longer before committing to any mark at all. She circles fewer things than you might expect, weighing practicality against desire in a way that comes from years of managing a household on a careful budget. When she does finally circle something, a bolt of fabric, a set of kitchen towels, it carries the weight of real consideration behind it, not impulse but genuine need balanced carefully against genuine want. The lamp overhead casts a warm yellow glow across the pages, making the black and white photographs feel almost soft around the edges. Outside, evening has settled fully now, and the kitchen window reflects back a version of the room itself. The lamp, the table, the four of you bent over your separate pages with the same quiet concentration. It is a peaceful kind of scene, ordinary in every way, and yet there is something almost sacred about it too. This shared ritual of wanting, marked so gently in pencil. Your father wanders through at one point, glancing over shoulders without quite stopping, offering a soft comment here and there. "That looks like a good one," he says, tapping his finger near a circled item before continuing on toward the back door to check on something outside. He does not circle anything himself tonight, though you know from past seasons that he has his own quiet wants tucked somewhere in these pages, things he considers carefully and rarely voices out loud. The pencil passes between hands throughout the evening, worn a little softer with each use, the tip growing rounder as the night goes on. Nobody rushes to finish. There is no deadline pressing against this particular evening, only the slow, comfortable work of considering, circling, occasionally erasing a mark that seemed like a good idea an hour ago, but now feels unnecessary in the softer light of reflection. By the time the evening winds down, the catalogue carries a small constellation of pencil circles scattered across its pages, each one a tiny private hope tucked quietly into the paper. Tomorrow, the list will be gathered from these marks, transferred carefully onto the order form waiting near the back of the book. But tonight, this is enough. Just the marking, just the quiet permission granted to yourself and to each other, one soft circle at a time. It is evening now, and the whole family has gathered around the table the way they do every year when the catalogue first arrives. Your father taps a page with his finger, your mother shakes her head gently, and somewhere beneath the disagreement is something warmer than arguing. It is deciding together. Everyone has an opinion, everyone gets heard, even if only for a moment before the conversation moves along to the next page. The lamp above the table throws its familiar circle of light across the open catalogue, illuminating whichever page currently holds everyone's attention. Tonight it happens to be a page of tools, wrenches and hammers arranged in tidy rows, and your father leans forward with the particular focus he reserves only for these pages, studying each item as though the fate of the household depends on choosing correctly. "That one there," he says, tapping a socket set with more enthusiasm than the object probably deserves, "would save me an hour every time I work on the truck." Your mother glances at it briefly, not unkindly, but with the practical eye of someone who has already mentally calculated what that hour saved might cost against other, more pressing needs waiting further back in the book. "We still need new towels," she reminds him gently, not as a correction but as a simple fact laid alongside his own, and for a moment the two considerations sit there together on the table, neither one winning outright, both simply present, waiting to be weighed. Your older brother chimes in from across the table, tapping a page further back where the fishing gear sits photographed against a painted lake backdrop. "What about this?" he asks, holding up the real photograph for everyone to see, though nobody responds with much urgency, the request more hopeful suggestion than serious proposal. You watch this unfold the way you do every year, the gentle back and forth of wants and needs, spoken aloud and gently weighed against one another, never with real tension, only the easy negotiation of people who trust each other enough to disagree without worry. Nobody raises their voice, nobody insists. There is only this soft volleying of suggestions, this shared understanding that whatever gets decided tonight will be decided together, even if the final choice belongs mostly to whoever holds the household's purse strings. Your grandmother, visiting for the season, offers her own quiet opinion from the end of the table, her voice softer than the rest but carrying its own particular authority. "In my day," she begins, and everyone leans in slightly, half amused, half genuinely curious, because her stories of ordering by mail decades earlier always carry some small detail nobody expects. A delivery delayed by weather, a substitution made without warning, small dramas from a gentler, slower version of this same tradition. The debate continues this way for the better part of an hour, drifting from page to page, tools giving way to fabric giving way to a brief and mostly joking argument about whether the household truly needs a second lamp for the parlour. Nobody keeps official score, though by the end of the evening a rough consensus has quietly formed. The tools move to the definite list, the fishing reel gently set aside for another season, the towels agreed upon without much fuss at all. What strikes you most, sitting here in the lamp's warm circle of light, is not any particular decision made tonight, but the ease of it all, the comfortable rhythm of a family working through wants together, nobody demanding, nobody dismissed outright, every voice given its small moment even if not every wish makes it onto the final list. This, more than the catalogue itself, feels like the real tradition, this hour of quiet negotiation, disagreement softened by affection, decisions made not by one person alone but by the whole family leaning together over the same open page. Eventually your mother rises to put the kettle on, signalling without words that tonight's debate has reached its natural close. The catalogue remains open on the table, its pages marked now with the quiet aftermath of tonight's discussion, ready to be revisited tomorrow when the actual order form finally gets filled in. For now, the conversation drifts toward other things, the day's small events, tomorrow's plans, the comfortable murmur of a family simply being together on an ordinary evening that somehow, in its own small way, still feels worth remembering. Let's move to the small yellow form tucked near the back of the book. Your mother sits with it now, licking the tip of her pencil out of habit, filling in each line with careful, deliberate handwriting. The item number matters as much as the price, and she checks it twice before writing it down because a mistake here means a week's lost, and nobody wants to wait longer than they already have to. The kitchen has gone quiet around her, the rest of the family occupied elsewhere now that the real decisions have been made, leaving only the careful business of committing those decisions to paper. She smooths the form flat against the table with the side of her hand, the paper thin and slightly yellowed, the printed lines waiting patiently for her neat practice script. She flips back through the marked pages one at a time, cross-referencing each circled item against its corresponding number, murmuring the digits softly under her breath as she copies them onto the form. 3, 4, 7, 2, she repeats quietly, checking the number against the page one more time before her pencil moves across the paper, the sound of graphite against paper filling the otherwise silent kitchen. You sit across from her, offering to help, though mostly you watch, fascinated by the seriousness with which she approaches this task. There is no room for carelessness here. Every wrong digit risks the wrong item arriving weeks from now, a mistake that cannot simply be corrected with a phone call the way it might be today. This form, once mailed, becomes something close to unchangeable, a decision cast in ink and sent out into the world to be trusted entirely to strangers. She pauses over the price column longest of all, adding the figures slowly in the margin, her lips moving slightly as she works through each sum. The total needs to match exactly what she has set aside in the small tin kept on the top shelf of the pantry, money saved carefully over recent weeks specifically for this purpose. When the numbers align, she allows herself a small, satisfied nod, the kind of quiet victory that comes from balancing a household budget correctly. Your father wanders in at one point, glancing over her shoulder without commenting, trusting entirely in her handling of this particular task. It has always been this way in your household, the ordering left mostly to her steady hand and careful mind, while he handles other responsibilities elsewhere. There is no discussion needed about this division of labour. It has simply always worked this way, each person managing what they manage best. The pencil scratches steadily across the page, line after line filling with the same careful penmanship, item numbers and prices and quantities, all recorded with the same unhurried precision. Occasionally she pauses to erase something, blowing the small eraser shavings from the paper before rewriting the line more neatly, unwilling to send off a form that looks anything less than exact. Outside, the evening deepens further, the kitchen window reflecting the warm lamplight back into the room, and still she works, unhurried, thorough, treating this small yellow form with the same seriousness she might bring to any important piece of correspondence. In many ways, that is exactly what this is, a letter of sorts, a careful message sent out to people she will never meet, trusting them completely to fulfill exactly what has been asked. Finally, she reaches the bottom of the form, checking the total one final time before setting her pencil down with a small sigh of completion. She reads back through everything once more, silently this time, her eyes tracing each line to catch any final errors before folding the form carefully in half, then in half again, tucking it into the envelope waiting beside her. You watch her seal the envelope, pressing the flap down firmly with her thumb, and something about that simple motion feels final in a way the rest of the evening hadn't quite been. The decision has been made now, recorded, sealed, ready to be carried into town tomorrow morning. All that remains is the walk to the post office and the long, familiar waiting that follows. But for tonight, this quiet work at the kitchen table feels complete, satisfying in its own careful, unhurried way. It is time now to take the envelope into town. The walk feels different today, lighter somehow, as if the order itself weighs less than the waiting that follows it. You pass the hardware store, the smell of oil and sawdust drifting out its open door, and the post office waits at the end of the street with its familiar brass handle, worn smooth by 1,000 hands just like yours. The morning air carries that particular late summer freshness, cool enough still to feel pleasant against your skin, though you know by midday the sun will have chased that coolness away entirely. You hold the envelope carefully as you walk, tucked inside your jacket pocket where it cannot be creased or damaged, as though the paper itself understands the importance of what it carries. Main Street stretches out ahead of you, familiar in every detail, the same storefronts you have passed 1,000 times before, each one greeting you with small, comfortable recognitions. Mr. Halloway sweeps the sidewalk outside his grocery store, nodding a good morning as you pass, and you return the greeting easily, the exchange requiring no more than a glance and a few words, the kind of small courtesy that fills an ordinary morning without needing to mean anything more than itself. The hardware store's open door releases its familiar mixture of scents, oil and sawdust, and something metallic underneath, and through the window you catch sight of Mr. Doyle helping a customer sort through a bin of nails, his voice carrying faintly out onto the sidewalk. You've always liked this particular stretch of the walk, the smell of it, the low hum of ordinary commerce happening all around you. Further along, a group of children play some version of tag near the corner, their laughter rising and falling with the rhythm of the game, entirely unconcerned with anything beyond this present moment of running and shouting and narrowly avoiding being caught. You watch them for a moment as you pass, remembering briefly your own morning spent exactly this way, before continuing on toward the post office. The building itself sits at the end of the street, exactly where it always has, its brick facade slightly weathered, the brass handle on the door polished smooth from years of hands, pushing through it just like yours. You pause outside for a moment, envelope still tucked safely in your pocket, feeling the small, private significance of what you're about to do. Inside, the post office carries its own particular quiet, the soft murmur of conversation at the counter, the occasional stamp of a rubber date marker against paper, the smell of ink and paper, and something faintly like dust that seems to belong only to buildings exactly like this one. You wait your turn patiently, watching the clerk work efficiently through the small line ahead of you. When your turn finally comes, you slide the envelope across the counter with a small measure of ceremony. Though the clerk handles it with the same practiced efficiency, he gives every piece of mail that crosses his counter. He weighs it briefly, affixes the necessary postage, and slides it into the outgoing bin behind him without any particular fanfare. The transaction complete in less time than it took you to walk here. And yet, walking back out onto the street, envelope now gone from your pocket, you feel the particular lightness that comes only from having set something in motion. The order is no longer yours to manage. It belongs now to the postal system, to the distant warehouse workers who will eventually pull your family's items from their shelves, to the truck drivers who will carry the package across whatever distance separates you from wherever these goods are kept. The walk home feels different than the walk into town had, unhurried in a new way, the errand completed, nothing left to do now but wait. You take the long way back, past the drugstore with its soda counter, past the small park where a few older men sit on benches discussing whatever men discuss on warm mornings exactly like this one. There is no reason to rush. The waiting has already begun, and there is nothing to do now but let the days pass the way they always do, one at a time, until eventually, weeks from now, the waiting will end. It is the kind of waiting that stretches quietly across the days, a waiting that does not announce itself but simply sits there, patient in the back of your mind. Each morning you glance toward the road a little longer than you did the day before. Time in 1955 did not rush the way it does now, and somehow that made wanting something feel almost as sweet as receiving it. The days settle into their ordinary rhythm round this quiet undercurrent of anticipation, chores completed, meals prepared, the usual business of the household continuing exactly as it always has. And yet beneath all of it runs this small, persistent awareness, a package somewhere between here and wherever it started, making its slow way toward your porch through means you cannot see or hurry along. You find yourself pausing at the window more often than usual, glancing toward the road during moments that have nothing to do with waiting at all, washing dishes, sweeping the kitchen floor, and yet somehow your eyes drift toward the window regardless, checking out of habit, more than expectation, for any sign of the delivery truck that has not yet come. Your mother notices this too, though she says nothing about it directly, only smiling faintly when she catches you glancing outside for the third time in an hour. She understands this particular restlessness better than anyone, having lived through it herself every season for years, the small ache of wanting something that has already been decided upon but not yet delivered. The evenings feel longest of all somehow, the hours after supper stretching out with nothing particular to fill them beyond the usual quiet activities, mending, reading, listening to the radio hum low in the corner. You find your mind wandering back toward the catalogue pages, picturing again the items you circled weeks ago, wondering exactly how they will look once they arrive, whether they will match the photographs as closely as you imagine. Your younger siblings ask about it constantly. Is it here yet? How much longer? Questions that carry no real expectation of a different answer than the one they have received every day this week. Not yet, you tell them. The same words repeated so often now that they have become almost a small ritual of their own, spoken gently without frustration, because everyone in the house understands that waiting is simply part of how this particular tradition works. There is something almost meditative in it, if you allow yourself to notice this slow passage of ordinary days carrying you steadily toward an eventual arrival. Nothing about the waiting itself is unpleasant, not really, only the persistent low hum of anticipation running quietly beneath everything else you do. You water the garden, you help with the wash, you walk to school and back, and all the while some small part of your attention remains fixed on the road, waiting for the moment the truck finally appears. Your father mentions it once at supper, half joking, wondering aloud whether the package has gotten lost somewhere between here and the warehouse, though nobody takes the comments seriously. These things simply take time, your mother reminds him gently, the same patient reassurance she offers everyone in the house whenever the waiting starts to feel a little longer than usual. At night, lying in bed, you sometimes find yourself picturing the package itself, wherever it might currently be, imagining it sitting in some vast warehouse, or perhaps already loaded onto a truck making its slow way across the miles between there and here. There is a particular comfort in this imagining, a way of feeling closer to something you cannot yet see or touch, simply by picturing its journey toward you. And so the days continue this way, ordinary and unhurried, each one carrying you a little closer to the moment you've been waiting for, though none of you know exactly which day that will be. This is simply how it worked. Back then, this slow, patient trust in a system you could not see or control, a trust that made the eventual arrival, whenever it finally came, feel like something worth every bit of the waiting that preceded it. Let's turn now to the smaller hands in the house, the ones who pressed their fingers against the toy pages until the corner softened. A tin drum, a set of marbles, a doll with painted eyes that seemed to follow you gently across the room. These were not just toys, they were promises kept, small proof that even in a busy household someone had been listening. The toy section of the catalogue held its own particular magic for the youngest members of the family, pages worn softer than any others from small fingers returning to them again and again throughout the weeks between ordering and arrival. Your little sister had claimed the doll for her own from the very first evening, tracing her finger over the painted face so many times that the page itself had begun to show the faint smudge of repeated touching. Your younger brother, meanwhile, had fixed his attention on the tin drum with the same singular focus he brought to everything that caught his interest, asking about it so frequently in the week since ordering that your mother had taken to gently reminding him, "Patience, it will come," in the same soft tone she used for all such requests. He would nod solemnly each time, accepting the answer, though his eyes would drift back toward the catalogue page anyway, unable to resist one more look. The marbles had been your own small addition to the order, tucked in almost as an afterthought alongside the more practical items your mother had prioritized. You remembered circling them quietly, almost shyly, unsure whether something so small and seemingly unnecessary deserved a place on the family's carefully considered list. But your mother had noticed the circle, and without much comment had included them anyway. understanding perhaps better than you did yourself how much a small handful of marbles could mean to a child. Watching your younger siblings during these weeks of waiting revealed something particular about the way children experience anticipation differently than adults do. Where you and your parents settled into the waiting with practiced patience, your youngest siblings seemed to feel every day of the delay acutely, asking again and again when the drum, the doll, the marbles might finally arrive, their small faces falling slightly each time the answer remained the same. Not yet. And yet there was something beautiful in their persistence too. The way they returned to the catalogue pages despite already knowing every detail by heart, tracing the same illustrations over and over as though committing them permanently to memory before the real objects ever arrived to replace the images. Your little sister had already named the doll before it even existed in her hands, whispering the name softly to herself as she studied its painted face, already forming a relationship with something she'd not yet touched. Your mother watched all this with the quiet indulgence of someone who understood exactly how important these small promises were to a child's sense of being cared for. She'd grown up with her own version of this exact anticipation, she told you once, waiting for her own small treasures to arrive decades earlier, and she remembered still, even now, the particular ache of that childhood waiting, sweet and impatient all at once. In the evenings, your younger siblings would sometimes act out small scenes with the toys they didn't yet possess. Your brother beating an imaginary rhythm on his knee where the drum would eventually rest. Your sister cradling empty air as though the doll already lived there in her arms. These small rehearsals of joy, performed weeks before the actual objects arrived, carried their own particular tenderness, evidence of just how much a child's imagination could sustain itself on nothing more than the promise of something good still coming. You found yourself in these weeks paying closer attention to your siblings' small excitements than you might have otherwise, recognizing in their impatience something you yourself had likely outgrown but still understood completely. There was a particular kind of love in this too, you realized. The quiet work your parents did every season to ensure that even the smallest members of the household received something meant just for them, chosen carefully, ordered deliberately, waited for together as a family until the day it all finally arrived. It is finally here, the day the truck rolls slowly down your street and stops right where you hoped it would. The driver carries the box up the porch steps with the same unhurried calm as everything else that season, and you meet him at the door before he even has the chance to knock. The cardboard is a little worn from the journey, but it does not matter, because inside is everything you have been waiting weeks to hold. You'd been watching from the front window that morning, more out of habit than real expectation, when the truck first appeared at the end of the street, its engine rumbling low and steady as it made its way past each house before finally unmistakably slowing in front of yours. Your heart had jumped a little at the sight, weeks of patient waiting suddenly collapsing into this single, unmistakable moment of arrival. The driver climbed down from his seat with the same easy familiarity of someone who had made this exact delivery countless times before, reaching into the back of the truck for the box that, to him, was simply another item on a long route, but to you represented something considerably larger. He carried it up the porch steps carefully, though not with any particular reverence, and you found yourself already at the door before his boot even touched the top step. "Morning," he said simply, extending the box toward you, and you took it with both hands, surprised briefly by its weight, heavier than you had expected, though perhaps that was only the weight of anticipation finally made physical. He offered a small nod, already turning back toward his truck, his work here finished, unaware or perhaps simply accustomed to the significance of what he had just delivered. You called out a thank you after him, though he had already reached the bottom of the steps, and he raised a hand briefly in acknowledgement without turning around, climbing back into his truck and pulling away down the street toward whatever house waited next on his route. You stood there a moment longer, box held against your chest, watching the truck disappear around the corner before finally turning back toward the house. Inside, you called out immediately, the words rushing out before you had even fully closed the door, and within moments the whole house had gathered around you in the front hallway. Your mother emerging from the kitchen, still wiping her hands on her apron. Your younger siblings thundering down the stairs at a speed that suggested they had been listening for this exact sound for days. The box sat between all of you now, ordinary cardboard suddenly transformed into something almost ceremonial simply by virtue of what it contained. Your father appeared last, wandering in from the yard, brushing dirt from his hands before joining the small crowd gathered around this unremarkable brown box that somehow held weeks of collective anticipation folded inside it. Nobody moved to open it immediately. There was a strange, comfortable pause, everyone simply looking at the box together, savouring this last moment before the waiting officially ended. Your mother finally broke the stillness, suggesting gently that perhaps the kitchen table might be a better place to properly examine everything, and the whole family moved together toward the kitchen, the box carried carefully between you like something precious, which, in its own modest way, it was. Setting it down on the table felt significant somehow. The cardboard scuffed slightly at the corners from its journey, the address label still clearly displaying your family's name and street in official typed letters. Your mother ran her hand across the top flap once, before beginning the careful work of opening it, and you all leaned in closer, drawn instinctively toward whatever waited just beneath that final layer of cardboard. This was the moment you realized, standing there among your family in the golden afternoon light filling the kitchen, that made all the earlier waiting worthwhile. Not simply the objects themselves, though those mattered too, but this particular gathering, this shared anticipation finally reaching its resolution together, as a family, exactly the way the whole process had begun weeks earlier around this very same table. Let's end here for now, at the kitchen table, where the box sits open and the whole family leans in close. Paper rustles, someone gasps softly, someone else laughs. It is the kind of moment that feels bigger than the object itself, a whole season of wanting folded quietly into a single afternoon. And for a little while, nothing else in the world needs your attention at all. Your mother's hands move carefully through the packing paper, setting each crumpled sheet aside gently as though it too deserved some measure of care, though of course it will be discarded soon enough. Beneath the paper, the first item reveals itself slowly, the corner of fabric peeking through before she lifts it free entirely, holding it up for everyone to see properly in the kitchen's warm afternoon light. It is exactly as it appeared in the catalogue, and yet somehow more real now, more solid. The fabric's actual texture finally available to be touched rather than merely imagined from a photograph. Your mother runs her fingers along the seam with quiet satisfaction, nodding slightly to herself in the way she does when something meets or exceeds her careful expectations. Your younger sister can barely contain herself now, practically vibrating with anticipation as your mother reaches deeper into the box, and when the doll finally emerges, wrapped carefully in its own protective paper, your sister's small gasp fills the kitchen with pure, uncomplicated delight. She takes it into her arms immediately, cradling it the way she had rehearsed so many times in her imagination over these past weeks, and now, finally, the imagining and the reality merge into something whole. Your brother waits less patiently for the drum, practically leaning over the box himself now, and when your mother finally lifts it free, he reaches for it eagerly, immediately testing its sound with an enthusiastic, uneven rhythm that fills the kitchen with noise nobody minds in this particular moment. The sound is imperfect, too loud, slightly off-tempo, and yet it carries a particular joy that makes everyone smile despite the sudden racket. You find your own package near the bottom, the small paper bag containing the marbles you had circled almost shyly weeks ago, uncertain whether such a small request deserved inclusion. Holding them now, feeling their cool, smooth weight rolling gently against your palm, you understand suddenly why your mother had included them without hesitation, some small requests mattering more than their size might suggest. Your father unwraps the tools last, examining each one with the careful, appreciative attention of someone who has spent weeks anticipating exactly this moment, testing the weight of the wrench in his hand, turning the socket set over to inspect its craftsmanship. He says little, but his satisfaction is evident in the way he handles each piece, setting them aside carefully rather than tossing them casually onto the growing pile of unwrapped items. The kitchen table has become, in these few minutes, a small landscape of unwrapped treasures, packing paper scattered across its surface, each family member absorbed in their own particular discovery, while still somehow remaining connected to everyone else's excitement, happening simultaneously around them. This is not a solitary unwrapping, each person opening their own gift alone in some private corner. This is entirely communal, every small gasp and laugh shared immediately with whoever happens to be standing nearest. Outside, the afternoon continues on exactly as ordinary afternoons always do, the neighbour's lawn still being mowed somewhere down the street, the light beginning its slow, late-day shift toward evening. But inside this kitchen, time has slowed considerably, stretched out to accommodate this small, significant unwrapping that represents weeks of careful consideration, patient saving, and quiet anticipation finally reaching its natural conclusion. Your mother gathers the emptied box eventually, folding down its flaps with the same careful attention she brought to everything else this afternoon, setting it aside to be used again for something else entirely in the weeks ahead. The packing paper gets smoothed and saved too, nothing wasted in a household where every material carries potential future use. And as the afternoon light continues its slow shift toward evening, the family remains gathered around the table a while longer, examining, discussing, admiring these small treasures that arrived after weeks of patient waiting. There is nowhere else anyone needs to be right now. This moment, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, belongs entirely to itself, complete and satisfying in exactly the way the whole season of waiting had promised it would be. It is a quiet weekday morning now, and your mother sits at the table with a small envelope of fabric swatches pinned to the catalogue page. She runs her thumb across each one slowly, testing the weight of it between her fingers before holding it up to the window light. There is a whole language in how she touches cloth, patient, unhurried, searching for something that will last more than one season. The kitchen is quieter than usual this morning, the rest of the household already scattered to their various tasks, leaving her alone with this small, deliberate ritual. Sunlight falls across the table in a wide, even band, and she positions each swatch carefully within it, checking how the colour shifts and settles under natural light, rather than trusting the artificial glow of the lamp she used the evening before. You watch from across the table, not quite understanding yet the particular expertise she brings to this task, though you sense it matters more than it might first appear. She holds up a deep blue cotton first, turning it slightly, watching how the light catches its weave, before setting it aside with a small, considering frown. "Too heavy for summer," she murmurs, mostly to herself, though you nod along as if you understand exactly what she means. The next swatch she lifts is lighter, a soft floral print that seems to brighten the whole table, simply by being unfolded across it. She presses it between her fingers, testing its give, checking whether it will hold its shape through repeated washing or wilt too easily after the first season's wear. This one, she says, holding it up toward you now, would suit your sister well, don't you think? You agree, though really it is her judgment being confirmed rather than your own opinion being sought. There is a practiced economy to how she works through the small stack. No hesitation wasted on fabric she has already dismissed with a glance, but real attention given to the ones that pass her first quick assessment. She's been doing this for years, you realise, watching her fingers move with the confidence of long practice, choosing fabric not simply by appearance, but by some deeper understanding of durability, drape, and how a garment will actually behave once it is worn and washed and worn again. Outside, you can hear the faint sound of someone raking leaves a few yards over, the steady scrape and gather of it blending into the quiet rhythm of the morning. Your mother pauses over one swatch a little longer than the others, a pale yellow gingham, holding it near the window where the light catches its small woven checks most clearly. She hums softly to herself, an old habit you've noticed before whenever she's thinking through a decision that matters more than it might seem from the outside. You ask her, finally, how she knows which fabric will hold up best, and she smiles slightly without looking up from her work. You learn to feel it, she says. Simple as that. Though of course it is not simple at all. It is years of mending torn hems and patching worn elbows, years of learning firsthand which fabrics betray you after only a few washes, and which ones remain faithful season after season. That knowledge lives in her hands now, more than in anything she could easily explain in words. She sets the yellow gingham aside in the small pile of favourites building slowly at her elbow, then reaches for the last swatch remaining, a deep green wool meant for winter coats. This one she takes longer with than any other, rubbing it between her fingers, holding it against her wrist to judge its warmth, even bringing it close enough to smell. Some old habit passed down from her own mother, perhaps a way of judging quality that goes beyond what the eyes alone can tell you. Good wool, she finally says, nodding slightly, setting it firmly among the chosen swatches. You notice she has narrowed the pile considerably now, more than half the sample set aside as unsuitable, leaving only a handful that have earned her genuine approval. There is something satisfying in watching this quiet process of elimination, the careful winnowing down toward only the very best choices, the ones that will actually serve the family well through whatever season lies ahead. She gathers the chosen swatches together now, tucking them back into their small envelope with the same careful attention she gave to examining them, before turning back to the catalogue page itself to note down the corresponding fabric numbers. Her pencil moves steadily, recording each selection alongside its price, building toward the larger order that will eventually take shape once every decision across every page has been made. You watch her finish this small task with quiet satisfaction, understanding a little better now why this particular ritual matters so much to her, why she gives it such careful, unhurried attention rather than rushing through it the way someone less experienced might. Fabric chosen carelessly means garments that fail too soon, seams that give way, colours that fade before their time. Fabric chosen well, the way she's just done, means clothing that will serve this family faithfully through whatever the coming seasons bring, one carefully considered swatch at a time. Let's talk about the shoes now, because everyone remembers a pair that arrived just slightly wrong, maybe a half size too big, meant to be grown into, or a little too snug through the toe no matter how many times you flexed your foot inside them. Your mother would press her thumb against the leather at the tip and nod, satisfied, the way mothers did when practicality mattered more than perfect comfort. You remember unwrapping your own pair that particular season, the leather stiff and unyielding straight out of the box, smelling faintly of tannin and something else you could never quite name, something new and slightly chemical that seemed to belong only to brand new shoes fresh from a factory somewhere you'd never seen. You slid your foot inside eagerly, expecting the same easy comfort of your worn-out old pair, only to find your toes pressing firmly against the front, the fit noticeably snug in a way that made your mother's face soften into a particular, familiar expression. "They'll stretch," she said, the same word she said every season when a new pair arrived, slightly imperfect, and you nodded, trusting her the way children trust their mothers about most things, even when your own toes disagreed rather firmly with her optimistic assessment. She knelt down in front of you, pressing her thumb firmly against the leather near your big toe, testing the give of the material with the same careful assessment she brought to choosing fabric swatches weeks earlier. "There's room to grow," she said, more to herself than to you, and in truth this was often the real calculation behind these slightly imperfect fits, not simple oversight but deliberate strategy, ordering a half size larger than needed because children's feet grew steadily throughout a year, and a shoe that fit perfectly today would likely pinch uncomfortably by spring. "Better a little loose now than too tight in 3 months," she would say, and you understood, even as a child, the particular economy behind this reasoning, though your toes still complained regardless of how sound the logic might be. You wore them anyway, of course, breaking them in slowly over the following weeks, the stiff leather gradually softening with each wearing, until eventually they moulded themselves, at least approximately, to the shape of your foot. There was always a brief, uncomfortable period following any new arrival, blisters forming along the heel, toes cramped slightly until the leather finally relented, but eventually, almost without noticing exactly when it happened, the shoes simply became comfortable, familiar, entirely yours. Your older brother had his own particular relationship with ill-fitting shoes, his feet seeming to grow at some unpredictable rate that never quite matched whatever size had been ordered for him. More than once a pair arrived already nearly too small, barely lasting a season before his toes pressed uncomfortably against the front, forcing an earlier reorder than anyone had planned for. Your mother would sigh good-naturedly over this particular unpredictability, though she never seemed truly frustrated by it, simply accepting it as one more small challenge in the ongoing project of keeping a growing family properly outfitted. Sometimes, if the fit was truly wrong, a return became necessary, the shoes carefully repacked into their original box and carried back into town, another brief errand added to the week's list. There was never any real embarrassment in this, no sense that a return reflected poorly on anyone's judgment. Sizes were, after all, only estimates, translated from a flat photograph and a printed number into the actual, particular shape of a real foot that could never be perfectly predicted from a catalogue page alone. You think sometimes about how different this all feels from the way shoes get chosen now, tried on directly, adjusted immediately if the fit proves wrong, no waiting required at all. There was something almost quaint about the whole process back then, this reliance on printed size charts and careful guesswork, followed by weeks of waiting to discover whether the guess had proven correct. And yet there was also something oddly reassuring in it too, the shared family ritual of breaking in a stiff new pair together, your mother's patient confidence that a slightly wrong fit could always, eventually, be coaxed into rightness through nothing more than patience and time. By the time each pair of shoes had truly settled into comfort, they carried with them the particular history of that adjustment period, scuffed slightly at the toe from those first uncertain days, the leather softened exactly to the shape of your foot through weeks of wearing. There was something almost sentimental in that transformation, watching a stiff, ill-fitting object gradually become something entirely comfortable and familiar, simply through the quiet passage of ordinary days. Let's turn now to the thicker catalogue, the one that arrives close to the holidays, heavier than any of the others, practically groaning under the weight of everything it holds. This one gets passed around differently, treated with a little more reverence, tucked beneath a pillow or hidden inside a drawer so no curious eyes catch a glimpse of what might be waiting under the tree. You notice the difference the moment it arrives, the postman handing it over with a small knowing smile, as though he too understands that this particular delivery carries more weight than the usual seasonal catalogue. It is thicker, certainly, but there is something else too, a kind of hush that settles over the house the moment it crosses the threshold, everyone instinctively lowering their voices slightly, as though the catalogue itself demands a measure of discretion. Your mother is the one who claims it first, carrying it upstairs before anyone else has the chance to look, and you understand without being told that this copy belongs to the parents now, at least for a while, its pages holding secrets meant to stay hidden until December finally arrives. You catch only a glimpse of it before it disappears, the cover slightly more festive than usual, small illustrations of ribbon and pine scattered across the border. Later that evening you find your father seated at the kitchen table, with the catalogue open in front of him, though he closes it quickly enough when he hears your footsteps on the stairs, a faint guilty smile crossing his face before he recovers his composure. "Just looking at some tools," he says, though you notice he has tucked a small scrap of paper between two pages, marking something he clearly does not want you to see just yet. This is different from the ordinary browsing that happens with every other seasonal catalogue. This deliberate secrecy, this careful hiding of pages and opinions from the very children who would otherwise be circling every toy in sight. You find yourself wondering what exactly might be marked on those hidden pages, though you know better than to ask directly, understanding instinctively that some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries until the proper morning arrives. Your younger siblings have not yet learned this particular restraint, and more than once you catch your little brother attempting to sneak a look at the catalogue when your parents are occupied elsewhere, only to be gently but firmly redirected by whichever parent notices first. "Not this one," they say, tucking it back into whatever drawer or shelf currently serves as its hiding place, and your brother pouts only briefly before finding something else to occupy his curiosity. There is a particular kind of magic in this deliberate secrecy, you realise, watching your parents move the catalogue from hiding place to hiding place throughout the following weeks, always just out of reach, always carrying with it the promise of surprises still unknown. Unlike the other catalogues, spread openly across the kitchen table for the whole family to browse together, this one exists mostly behind closed doors, glimpsed only in fragments, its true contents remaining a mystery until Christmas morning finally reveals what has been chosen. Your mother works through her own selections late at night, you suspect, after the rest of the household has gone to sleep, the lamp in the parlour sometimes still glowing faintly when you wake for a glass of water. You never ask her about this directly, understanding somehow that these late evening hours belong entirely to her own private planning, the careful, secretive work of choosing gifts meant to surprise rather than simply fulfill an already known want. Occasionally, small clues slip through despite everyone's best efforts at discretion. You notice your father humming a particular tune while glancing toward the closet where you suspect the catalogue might currently be hidden, or catch your mother exchanging a quick, meaningful look with him across the dinner table that clearly references some shared secret neither of them intends to explain. These small glimpses only heighten the anticipation building steadily as December approaches, each hidden clue adding another small thread to the growing mystery of what exactly might be waiting under the tree this year. The weeks leading up to Christmas carry their own particular rhythm because of this shared secrecy, different from the ordinary anticipation of catalogue ordering during other seasons. There is less of the open family debate that usually accompanies these decisions, less circling of pages together around the kitchen table. Instead, there is this quieter, more private kind of anticipation built from stolen glimpses and half-court conversations, everyone in the household aware that something is being planned, though nobody quite certain exactly what. By the time Christmas morning finally arrives, weeks of careful secrecy dissolve all at once into the bright, unfiltered joy of unwrapped gifts. The mysteries of those hidden catalogue pages finally resolved into actual tangible presents spread beneath the tree. And though the excitement of that particular morning always feels immediate and overwhelming, you understand now, looking back, that its true beginning happened weeks earlier, in this quieter, more secretive version of the same familiar ritual. Your parents working carefully behind closed doors to ensure that this one catalogue, more than any other, would deliver something worth all the waiting. It is evening again, and your father sits with the catalogue open across his knee, comparing prices the way some men compare baseball scores. He mutters numbers under his breath, tapping the page twice before deciding, because in 1955 every dollar had a job to do, and he took that responsibility seriously, even over something as small as a new hand tool. The lamp beside his chair casts its familiar warm circle of light across the page, and you watch from the sofa as his finger traces slowly down the column of prices, pausing occasionally to compare one tool against a similar one listed just a few pages further along. He has always approached these decisions with the same careful deliberation he brings to balancing the household accounts each month, unwilling to spend a single dollar without first weighing exactly what that dollar might otherwise accomplish elsewhere. "This one here," he says, half to himself, tapping a page showing a set of wrenches, "costs nearly the same as the drill I've been considering." He falls quiet again, working through some internal calculation that seems to weigh not just price against price, but usefulness against usefulness, trying to determine which tool will earn its keep more thoroughly over the coming year. You've watched him do this every season, this careful comparison, shopping conducted entirely within the pages of a single catalogue, no other stores to compare against, no other prices to check beyond what sits printed directly in front of him. And yet he treats the exercise with the same seriousness he might bring to any significant financial decision, understanding that even small, careful savings accumulated over many such choices eventually add up to something meaningful for the household's overall budget. He flips back several pages to double-check a price he noted earlier, his lips moving slightly as he recalculates the difference between two nearly identical items. $3 less for barely any difference in quality, he murmurs, nodding slightly to himself, already leaning toward whichever option promises the better value, rather than simply the nicer appearance. Your mother glances over from her own mending nearby, offering an occasional comment when he asks for her opinion, though mostly she leaves this particular kind of comparison to him, just as he leaves the fabric selections mostly to her. There is an unspoken division in how these decisions get made, each parent bringing their own particular expertise to bear on whatever category of purchase falls within their understanding. You ask him once why he spends so long considering something as ordinary as a wrench, and he looks up from the page with a small, patient smile, the kind he reserves for questions he considers worth answering properly. $1 saved here, he explains, is $1 available somewhere else when we need it. It is a simple enough explanation, though you sense there is something deeper behind it too, some older habit formed through years of careful, deliberate living that values patience and consideration over quick or careless spending. The evening continues this way, page after page compared and weighed, occasional decisions marked with a small check in pencil beside whatever item has finally earned his approval. Some pages he passes over entirely without much consideration, recognizing immediately that whatever price appears there exceeds what the household can reasonably justify this particular season. Others he returns to multiple times, unable to quite settle on a final decision until he has fully satisfied himself that he has found the best possible value available. By the time he finally closes the catalogue for the evening, several small pencil marks scattered across its pages, you understand that this quiet, careful comparison has been its own kind of work, less visible perhaps than your mother's careful fabric selection or the family's shared debate around the kitchen table, but no less important to how this household manages its resources. Every dollar considered carefully, every purchase weighed against its true usefulness. This too is part of what makes the whole process of catalogue ordering feel less like simple consumption and more like a careful, considered kind of stewardship, each family member contributing their own particular skill toward ensuring that whatever finally arrives in that cardboard box truly earns its place in the household. He sets the catalogue aside finally, stretching slightly in his chair, satisfied with an evening's work well done. Tomorrow perhaps he will revisit a few of tonight's decisions one final time before the order gets finalised, but for now this careful comparison feels complete enough. Another quiet contribution toward the larger collective decision, slowly taking shape across the whole family's combined efforts. Let's step outside for a moment, onto the porch, where your neighbour leans against the railing holding her own catalogue, dog-eared and worn from her own careful reading. You compare notes the way old friends do, laughing over the strange gadgets, sighing over the dresses neither of you can quite justify buying yet. It is a small, easy kind of connection, built from nothing more than shared pages. The afternoon sun slants warm across the porch boards, and you settle into the chair beside her, your own catalogue balanced on your knee, hers considerably more worn than yours from weeks of repeated handling. She flips to a page near the middle, holding it out toward you with the particular enthusiasm of someone eager to share something she has already decided is worth sharing. "Look at this one," she says, tapping a photograph of a dress in soft green. "Wouldn't that be something for the summer social?" You lean over to look properly, admiring the fabric's pattern, though you both know without saying so that neither of you has quite enough set aside this season to justify something so clearly meant for occasions rather than necessity. Maybe next season, she sighs, though there is no real disappointment in it, only the easy acceptance that comes from years of practicing exactly this kind of patient restraint. You nod in agreement, understanding completely, having had this same conversation with her nearly every season for as long as you can remember. She flips further through her own catalogue, pausing on a page showing kitchen gadgets you have never quite understood the purpose of, strange mechanical devices promising to slice or peel or mix with unprecedented efficiency. "Can you imagine actually needing something like that?" she laughs, and you laugh along with her, both of you fairly certain that whatever these devices promise, your own grandmothers managed perfectly well without them for decades. The conversation drifts easily this way, page to page, comment to comment, the particular rhythm of two neighbours who have shared this exact porch, this exact activity, for years running. There is no competition in it, despite what the segment's title might suggest, only the comfortable camaraderie of comparing notes with someone who understands completely the particular pleasures and frustrations of catalogue browsing. She mentions, almost in passing, that her husband has already circled several tools he wants this season, and you tell her yours has done exactly the same. Both of you exchanging a knowing, good-humoured glance that speaks to the shared, familiar experience of watching husbands deliberate endlessly over hardware, while wives handle the more practical decisions regarding fabric and household necessities. "Did you see the toy section this year?" she asks, and you nod, describing briefly what your younger siblings have already claimed as their own from the pages you have shared with them. She describes her own children's excitement in turn, and for a while the conversation settles into this comfortable territory, comparing the small joys and minor frustrations of managing a household's worth of wants against its available resources. The afternoon stretches on this way, unhurried, the two of you occasionally falling quiet as you each return to your own catalogue for a moment, before surfacing again with some new observation worth sharing. This is not envy exactly, despite what a stranger might assume watching two women compare their catalogues on a porch, but something gentler, more like the comfortable solidarity of people navigating the same particular challenges and pleasures side by side. Eventually the conversation turns toward the ordinary business of the afternoon, supper needing to be started soon, children needing to be called in from wherever they have wandered off to play. Your neighbour closes her catalogue with a small, satisfied sigh, tucking it beneath her arm as she rises from the porch railing. "We'll compare again once the orders arrive," she says, and you agree readily, already looking forward to this next stage of shared experience, comparing not just the printed pages now, but the actual, tangible objects that will eventually arrive in each of your households. She makes her way back down the porch steps and across the yard toward her own home, and you watch her go for a moment before turning back to your own catalogue, settling in for a few more quiet minutes before the evening's chores call you inside as well. There is something valuable in this small ritual, you realise. Watching her disappear through her own front door, this simple pleasure of sharing catalogue pages with someone who understands completely the particular joys and small sacrifices involved in choosing carefully from a limited household budget. It costs nothing beyond an afternoon's conversation, and yet it adds something meaningful to the whole experience. This quiet, comfortable companionship built from nothing more than shared pages and mutual understanding. It is a slow process now, watching the coin jar on the shelf fill a little more each week. Every nickel dropped inside makes a small, satisfying sound, proof that patience really does add up to something eventually. You shake the jar gently sometimes just to hear how close you're getting, and the sound alone feels like progress. The jar itself sits on the kitchen shelf, exactly where it has always sat, glass worn slightly cloudy from years of handling, its label long since faded beyond legibility. You remember watching your mother place the first coins inside it weeks ago, a simple, deliberate ritual repeated every payday since, a few coins set aside before anything else gets spent, tucked carefully into this modest savings meant specifically for whatever the family decides to order this particular season. You have taken to checking the jar's progress almost daily now, lifting it carefully from the shelf to feel its weight, shaking it gently to hear how the coins shift and settle inside. There is something satisfying in this small ritual, watching an abstract goal slowly become something you can actually measure ounce by ounce, coin by coin, the jar growing heavier week after week in a way that feels like tangible proof of patience finally paying off. Your mother adds to it faithfully each week, a few coins from whatever remains after the household's necessary expenses has been covered. Never much at any single time, but steady, consistent, the kind of small sacrifice that accumulates meaningfully over enough weeks strung together. She never counts the total aloud, at least not where you can hear her, though you suspect she keeps a careful running tally somewhere in her mind, always aware of exactly how close the family is getting toward whatever goal this particular jar has been designated for. Sometimes you contribute your own small coins too, whatever you have managed to earn or save from your own modest allowance, dropping them in with a quiet sense of participation in something larger than yourself. Your mother never asks you to contribute, but she never discourages it either, seeming to understand that this small gesture matters to you, this feeling of having played some part, however small, in whatever eventually gets ordered once the jar's contents finally get counted and converted into an actual purchase. Your younger siblings have their own relationship with the jar too, though theirs is considerably less patient than yours. Your little brother in particular seems to check it almost hourly some days, shaking it enthusiastically until your mother gently reminds him that shaking it too vigorously risks knocking coins loose from wherever they have settled, and besides, shaking it faster does not make it fill any quicker, no matter how much he might wish otherwise. There is a particular lesson embedded in this slow accumulation, you realize, one your mother has never stated directly, but which becomes clear simply through watching the process unfold week after week. Patience, applied consistently, eventually produces results that impatience alone never could. The jar does not fill overnight, no matter how much anyone might wish it would, but it does fill steadily, reliably, so long as everyone remains committed to the small, regular contributions that make its eventual fullness possible. Some evenings, your father empties his own pockets into the jar too, whatever loose change has accumulated there throughout his day, adding it without much comment, simply another small contribution toward the family's shared patient goal. You notice he never resents this small sacrifice, understanding, as your mother does, that these modest, regular contributions matter more in aggregate than any single large sum might, spread as they are across enough weeks to feel manageable rather than burdensome. Eventually, weeks from now, the jar will be emptied entirely, its contents counted carefully across the kitchen table, coins sorted and stacked, and finally converted into whatever sum the family has managed to save toward their upcoming order. That day feels distant still, though closer now than it did when the jar first sat nearly empty on the shelf. For now, the process continues exactly as it has each week. Coins added faithfully, the jar's weight increasing gradually, patience quietly doing its slow, steady work exactly as it always does, one small contribution at a time, until eventually enough is gathered to make possible whatever the family has been patiently working toward all along. Let's turn to the children's section again, because there was something almost sacred about handing a child the catalogue and letting them dream freely, page after page, without needing to explain why they couldn't have everything at once. Their fingers would trace the toy trucks and dolls slowly, memorizing details they would talk about for weeks before Christmas ever arrived. You remember handing the catalogue to your youngest cousin during one of her visits, watching her face light up the moment she reached the toy section, her small fingers immediately beginning their careful, deliberate exploration of every page. She did not rush, despite her obvious excitement, taking time with each photograph, studying details that seemed insignificant to adult eyes, but clearly mattered enormously to her own careful consideration. "This one," she said eventually, pointing to a small tea set arranged prettily against a painted background, and then a moment later, or maybe this one, her finger shifting to a doll with soft yellow hair. There was no expectation attached to these declarations, no assumption that naming something meant she would actually receive it. This was simply the pleasure of wanting freely, without the weight of practicality yet pressing down on her small shoulders, the way it eventually would as she grew older. You watched her turn each page slowly, sometimes lingering for what felt like minutes on a single photograph, memorizing every detail with the particular intensity children bring to things that matter deeply to them, even when adults might consider those things fairly insignificant in the larger scheme of household needs and budgets. This was her wish book, you realized, watching her work through its pages with such careful devotion. A book meant not for practical ordering, but simply for the pleasure of imagining, unrestrained by the usual considerations of price or necessity. Nobody in the family discouraged this particular kind of dreaming, understanding instinctively that children needed this space to want freely, even knowing full well that most of what got named this way would remain simply imagined rather than actually delivered. There's a particular kindness in this allowance, you think, watching adults smile indulgently as children point excitedly toward one toy after another, never quite saying no directly, simply letting the dreaming continue for as long as the child wished to sustain it. Your little cousin eventually reached the section featuring toy trains, and her excitement shifted into something even more intense, her small hand pressing flat against the page as though trying to physically absorb the image through her palm. "This one," she whispered, "this exact one," and something in her tone suggested this particular want had crystallized into something more specific than her earlier, more scattered declarations of interest. You noticed your aunt, standing nearby, exchange a small glance with your uncle at this particular moment, though neither of them said anything directly to the child. This, you understood later, was how these particular Christmas surprises often took shape, adults quietly noting which specific items seemed to capture a child's genuine, sustained interest, filing that information away for later use without ever confirming or denying what might eventually arrive under the tree. The wish book, in this sense, served a purpose beyond simple entertainment, becoming instead a kind of quiet communication between children and the adults responsible for eventually choosing their gifts. Children rarely stated their wants directly to parents, at least not in any organised way, but watching them move through catalogue pages revealed everything an attentive adult needed to know. Which toys captured lasting attention, which ones were merely glanced at and forgotten, which single item among dozens of possibilities seemed to matter more than all the rest combined. Your little cousin eventually closed the catalogue herself, having reached its final pages, her small face carrying the particular satisfaction of someone who has spent a genuinely pleasurable hour simply imagining. She had not received anything yet, of course, nothing beyond the simple pleasure of looking and wanting freely, and yet she seemed entirely content, as though the wishing itself had been its own kind of gift, independent of whatever might or might not eventually arrive. Watching her carry the catalogue carefully back toward the shelf where it belonged, you found yourself appreciating this particular tradition more than you had before, understanding now how much quiet purpose lived inside what might otherwise seem like simple, idle browsing. This was how children learned patience, in some small way, learned the particular pleasure of anticipation itself, separate entirely from whatever eventual fulfillment might or might not follow. And this was how families learned their children's hearts too, one carefully studied catalogue page at a time, gathering quiet clues toward whatever surprises the coming season might eventually bring. It is a small detail, easy to overlook, but your mother sometimes tucked a short note in with the order form, a polite line thanking whoever might read it on the other end. It was a small gesture in a world that still believed manners mattered even when speaking to someone you would never meet. You remember watching her do this one particular evening, the order form already completed and folded, ready to be sealed into its envelope, when she paused instead, reaching for a small scrap of paper kept specifically for this purpose. She smoothed it flat against the table, picked up her pencil once more, and began writing a few careful lines before adding it to the envelope alongside the formal order itself. You asked her once why she bothered with this small addition, since surely whoever processed these orders received hundreds, perhaps thousands of similar forms every single day, unlikely to pause and read anything beyond the essential numbers and addresses required to fulfill the request properly. She considered the question seriously before answering, her pencil still resting lightly against the paper. "It costs her nothing to be kind," she said simply, and somehow that answer satisfied you completely, understanding even as a child that some gestures matter, regardless of whether they are noticed or acknowledged by whoever eventually receives them. She continued writing, her handwriting careful and neat, thanking whoever might process the order for their attention. perhaps mentioning briefly how much the family looked forward to this particular season's arrival. Small pleasantries that required nothing from the reader beyond a brief moment's attention, if that. This small habit revealed something about her character you had perhaps not fully appreciated before. This instinct toward courtesy, even in circumstances where courtesy served no obvious practical purpose. The clerks and warehouse workers who eventually handled your family's order would likely never read her small note at all, buried as it would be beneath countless other similar forms requiring their attention. And yet she wrote it anyway, faithfully, every single season, understanding perhaps that the gesture mattered more for what it revealed about her own values than for whatever effect it might have on its intended recipient. You watched her fold the small note carefully, tucking it alongside the formal order form before sealing the envelope shut. "Some things," she said, almost to herself, "are worth doing simply because they are the right thing to do, regardless of whether anyone notices or responds in kind." There was something quietly admirable in this philosophy, you thought. This commitment to small courtesies extended even towards strangers who would remain forever anonymous, connected to your family only through this brief, one-directional exchange of paper and politeness. Your father, watching this same small ritual unfold across many seasons, never commented directly on it, though you suspected he shared her particular philosophy regarding small kindnesses extended without expectation of acknowledgement. This was simply how your household operated, you realized. This quiet insistence on maintaining certain standards of courtesy and consideration, even in circumstances where such standards might easily have been abandoned without any obvious consequence. You found yourself in later years adopting this same small habit yourself whenever you filled out your own order forms, adding a brief note of thanks almost without thinking about it. The gesture having become so thoroughly ingrained through years of watching your mother do exactly the same thing. It felt strange at first, writing to someone you would never meet, never see, never know anything about beyond their role in processing your family's modest request. And yet the gesture felt right, somehow, exactly as your mother had always insisted it would, regardless of whether it accomplished anything beyond the simple, private satisfaction of having extended kindness where none was strictly required. This small tradition, easy to overlook amid all the more significant rituals surrounding the catalogue's arrival and eventual fulfillment, nonetheless carried its own particular weight, revealing something meaningful about the values your family carried into even its smallest, most private transactions. Courtesy extended without expectation. Kindness offered simply because kindness mattered, regardless of whether it was ever noticed, acknowledged, or returned in kind. This was the quiet lesson embedded in your mother's small, careful notes, tucked faithfully into envelope after envelope across so many patient seasons of catalogue ordering. A lesson you carried forward long after those particular catalogues themselves had faded into memory. Let's be honest for a moment, because no memory of the Sears catalogue is complete without mentioning its second life once the pages had been read and reread past the point of usefulness. Old catalogues found their way to outbuildings across the country, torn pages doing quiet, humble work long after their glossy purpose had passed. You remember the particular chill of early mornings out back, the wooden door creaking on its hinge, and there, hanging faithfully from a small nail, the previous season's catalogue, its cover long since faded, its once glossy pages softened and curling from months of exposure to damp air and changing weather. Nobody spoke of this particular use directly, though everyone in the family understood it without needing any explanation at all. It was a practical matter mostly, this quiet transition from treasured wish book to humble necessity, and there was no real shame attached to it, only the plain, unremarkable acceptance of frugality that governed so much of household life in those years. Nothing went to waste if it could possibly be helped, and a thick catalogue, its usefulness as a shopping guide long since expired, still had plenty of service left to offer in whatever capacity it could. You noticed sometimes how the pages toward the back seemed to disappear first, the plain, unillustrated order forms and index pages sacrificed before the more decorative photograph pages further toward the front. There was an unspoken hierarchy to this too. The most treasured images, perhaps a particularly admired dress or a beloved toy long since received, sometimes spared a little longer than the rest, tucked back further on the nail as though earning some small, temporary reprieve. Your younger brother found this whole arrangement endlessly amusing, of course, the way young boys often find humour in anything even remotely indelicate, and he would sometimes tease your sister about whatever dress she had once circled, now serving this considerably less glamorous second purpose. She would swat at him half-heartedly, though even she could not entirely suppress a small laugh at the particular absurdity of it all. This practice, ordinary and unremarkable as it seemed at the time, carried its own small significance too, you think now, looking back. It represented something about how thoroughly your family and others like yours extracted value from everything they owned, allowing nothing to be simply discarded so long as some further use could still be found. The catalogue had served its glamorous purpose for weeks, inspiring careful selection and patient waiting and eventual delighted unwrapping, and now in its final season of usefulness, it served a considerably humbler purpose with the same quiet reliability. There was something almost democratic about it too. This final chapter shared equally by every catalogue, regardless of how treasured it had once been. The thick Christmas edition, handled so carefully and secretively just months earlier, eventually met the same fate as every ordinary seasonal catalogue before it, its pages gradually disappearing one by one until nothing remained but the empty nail waiting for whatever new edition would eventually arrive to begin the whole cycle again. You remember overhearing your grandmother mention once that this particular practice had been common for as long as she could remember, long before your own memories began, a tradition passed down not through any formal instruction, but simply through quiet, practical necessity repeated across enough generations that nobody thought to question it. It was simply how things were done, how usefulness got extracted fully from every object before that object finally, truly reached the end of its purpose. Looking back now, there is something almost tender in this memory, despite its plain, unglamorous nature. It speaks to a particular kind of thrift that governed everyday life then, an instinct toward resourcefulness that found value even in something as seemingly finished as an outdated catalogue. Nothing wasted, nothing discarded while any further use remained, and somehow this humble final chapter, however unremarkable it might seem compared to the earlier excitement of ordering and unwrapping, feels like its own small, honest piece of the complete story. The quiet, practical ending to a cycle that would begin again fresh with the very next season's arrival. It is your grandmother's turn now, and she flips straight past the toys and the tools toward the section she cares about most, the housewares, the aprons, the small kitchen tools that make an old routine feel new again. She lingers there longer than anyone else in the house, and nobody rushes her. She settles into her favourite chair near the window, the catalogue balanced comfortably across her knees, her reading glasses perched carefully on the end of her nose as she begins her slow, deliberate journey through pages that hold little interest for anyone else in the household, but clearly mean a great deal to her. You notice she skips past entire sections without much pause. The toys, the men's clothing, Even the fabric swatches your mother finds so absorbing, moving instead with quiet purpose toward the section devoted to household items. Here, finally, her pace slows considerably, her finger tracing gently along photographs of mixing bowls and rolling pins, aprons trimmed with small embroidered flowers, tea towels printed with cheerful patterns she examines with the careful attention of someone truly considering each option's merit. This is where she is happiest, you realise, watching her linger over a photograph of a simple wooden spoon set, an item so ordinary it seems hardly worth a second glance, and yet she studies it with genuine interest. You asked her once why this particular section held such appeal for her, when there were surely more exciting pages elsewhere in the catalogue worth exploring. She looked up at you over the rim of her glasses with a small, patient smile. "These are the things I use every single day," she said simply, as though this explained everything, which perhaps it did. A new dress gets worn occasionally. A new tool gets used when the particular task arises. But a good rolling pin, a sturdy apron, these things touch her hands nearly every morning of her life. She pauses now over a particular apron, holding the page up slightly to catch better light from the window, examining the pattern of small yellow flowers scattered across pale blue fabric. "This reminds me of one my own mother wore," she says quietly, mostly to herself, though you catch the words anyway, sensing suddenly that this particular page carries some quiet weight of memory beyond its simple practical function. You watch her linger there a moment longer before turning the page reluctantly, moving on toward the kitchen tool section just beyond it. Here she pauses again, this time over a set of mixing bowls nested neatly inside one another, their surfaces glazed in a soft cream colour that seems to please her considerably. "These would be nice for the kitchen," she murmurs, and you sense this comment carries real consideration behind it, not idle admiration, but genuine practical thought about how these particular bowls might serve her daily routine. Your grandmother's approach to the catalogue feels different from everyone else's in the household, you notice. Less about wanting new things simply for the pleasure of novelty, and more about carefully considering which items might genuinely improve the daily rhythms of her life, however modestly. She does not circle many pages, unlike your mother or siblings, but the few she does mark carry real weight behind them, each one representing something she has clearly weighed thoughtfully against her actual needs. She reaches eventually toward the back of this section, where smaller household items are pictured, potato peelers and can openers and other small tools whose simplicity belies how frequently they get used throughout an ordinary week. She examines each one with the same careful attention, testing in her mind, you suspect, exactly how each tool might feel in her hand, how it might perform against the particular task she performs, almost without thinking every single day. By the time she finally closes the catalogue, only a handful of pages carry her small pencil marks, far fewer than anyone else in the family typically manages, and yet you sense these few marks represent something more deeply considered than the more numerous circles marked by younger, more impulsive family members. This is not wanting for the sake of wanting, you realise. Watching her set the catalogue aside with quiet satisfaction. This is the careful, practical consideration of someone who has spent decades understanding exactly what genuinely improves a life built around simple, daily routines, and exactly what merely distracts from it. Let's notice something quietly remarkable here. The fact that no one had to knock on your door to sell you any of this. The catalogue did the convincing all on its own. Page after page, no pressure, no persuasion, just quiet possibility waiting patiently for you to turn to the next page whenever you were ready. You think about this sometimes, comparing it against the occasional door-to-door salesman who did visit your neighbourhood selling other goods, encyclopedias or vacuum cleaners, or whatever particular product happened to occupy their attention that season. There was always something faintly uncomfortable about those visits. The salesman's practiced enthusiasm, his careful demonstrations meant to convince you of some need you had not previously recognized in yourself. The catalogue worked entirely differently, you realize, arriving quietly through the mail without any accompanying pressure or performance, simply presenting its pages and allowing you to browse entirely at your own pace, free from any obligation to purchase anything at all. There was no one standing at your door watching your reaction, no one prepared to counter your hesitation with some rehearsed argument designed to overcome your reluctance. You remember one particular afternoon when a travelling salesman did knock at your door, offering some new kitchen gadget your mother politely declined despite his considerable practiced charm. After he left, she remarked, almost to herself, that she preferred simply looking through the catalogue in her own time, without anyone standing over her shoulder trying to convince her of anything. "There's no rush in the mail," she said, and something in that simple observation stuck with you afterward. This absence of pressure changed the entire experience of considering a purchase, you think, comparing the two approaches carefully. With the catalogue, every decision felt entirely your own, arrived at through careful, unhurried consideration, rather than persuaded into being by someone else's calculated argument. You could close the catalogue whenever you wished, return to it hours or days later, change your mind entirely without ever needing to explain yourself to anyone standing expectantly in your doorway. Your father mentioned once that he appreciated this particular quality above almost everything else the catalogue offered. "No fellow trying to talk me into something I don't need," he said, tapping the cover approvingly. "Just the goods themselves, laid out plainly, priced honestly, and left entirely up to me whether I want them or not." There was a certain dignity in this arrangement, you sense, this quiet trust extended toward the customer's own judgment, rather than any attempt to override it through clever persuasion. You wonder, sometimes, whether this absence of pressure actually made the eventual decisions feel more genuine somehow, more truly reflective of what your family actually wanted or needed, rather than what some skilled salesman had managed to convince them they wanted. There was no one to blame afterward if a purchase turned out disappointing, no salesman's persuasive voice to hold responsible for talking you into something you later regretted. Every choice belonged entirely to your own family's careful consideration, weighed and decided without any outside interference at all. This quality, though never discussed directly or celebrated explicitly, nonetheless shaped the whole experience of catalogue ordering in ways that feel significant looking back now. The complete absence of any salesman meant complete presence of your own judgment instead. Every page turned at your own pace. Every decision reached through your own private reasoning rather than someone else's calculated performance. You think finally about how different this feels from certain modern experiences, though you catch yourself before drifting too far into comparison, understanding that this particular story belongs entirely to its own time and place. What matters, remembering it now, is simply this quiet dignity the catalogue offered, this respect for your family's own pace and judgment. No pressure applied, no persuasion attempted, just patient pages waiting exactly as long as needed for you to decide, entirely on your own terms, exactly what you wanted, and precisely when you were ready to want it. It is an awkward errand now, walking back into town with a box you have to return, the shoes too small, the coat the wrong shade of blue. There is no shame in it, though, just a simple exchange of paper and patience. Another short wait before the next box arrives, hopefully closer to right this time. You carry the box carefully down the same familiar street you walked weeks earlier when first sending the original order, though this particular errand carries a slightly different weight than that first, hopeful journey. The coat inside, meant for your younger sister, arrived in a shade of blue considerably darker than the photograph had suggested, close enough to seem almost right at first glance, but wrong enough, once compared directly against her preferences, that everyone agreed a return was necessary. Your mother had examined the coat carefully when it first arrived, holding it up against the window light the same way she once examined fabric swatches, before finally sighing and admitting that the colour simply would not do. "These things happen sometimes," she said, folding the coat carefully back into its box. "The photograph doesn't always match perfectly." There was no frustration in her voice, only the plain acceptance that comes from years of understanding that a printed catalogue page could only approximate, never perfectly replicate, an item's true appearance. Now you walk toward the post office with this same box tucked carefully under your arm, feeling a small measure of awkwardness you cannot quite explain, though you know rationally there is nothing to be embarrassed about. Returns happen regularly enough that the postal clerk barely glances up with any particular curiosity when you slide the box across the counter, processing the paperwork with the same brisk efficiency he brings to every other transaction that crosses his desk. "Wrong colour," you explain, though he hardly needs the explanation, already reaching for the necessary forms with practiced familiarity. He asks a few simple questions, confirms the original order number, notes down the reason for return, and within a few minutes the whole transaction is complete. The box now belonging to the postal system once again, beginning its journey back toward wherever it originated. Walking home afterward, you find yourself thinking about how ordinary this particular errand actually is, despite the small awkwardness you felt carrying the box into town. Every family experiences this occasionally, an item arriving slightly different than expected. A size wrong, a colour miscalculated, a fabric feeling different in person than it appeared in the flat printed photograph. This is simply part of the process, an acknowledged, accepted possibility built into the whole system of ordering from pages rather than examining goods directly with your own hands. Your mother mentioned once that she remembered returning items herself as a young bride, learning through occasional trial and error exactly how much to trust the catalogue's photographs and descriptions, and how much to build in a small margin for potential disappointment. "It's simply part of learning to order well," she said. "This understanding that sometimes things arrive imperfectly, and the correction process, though mildly inconvenient, remains simple enough to manage without any real difficulty." You think about the weeks ahead now, another waiting period beginning, though this one feels slightly different from the original anticipation, less hopeful excitement and more simple, practical patience, waiting for a correction rather than a first arrival. Your sister will need to wait a little longer for her coat, though she takes this news with more grace than you might have expected, accepting the small delay as simply another part of how these things sometimes work. By the time the replacement coat finally arrives, several weeks later, correctly coloured this time, the entire returning process will have faded into little more than a minor footnote in the season's larger story, quickly forgotten once the properly matched coat finally settles into your sister's closet. But for now, walking home from this particular errand, you carry with you a small, quiet understanding about how these systems actually work, imperfect sometimes, certainly, but flexible enough to accommodate those imperfections without any real hardship, patient enough to allow for correction, honest enough to acknowledge that even careful ordering occasionally produces results slightly different than originally hoped for. Let's pause on something a little heavier. The years not so long before this one, when catalogues grew thinner and choices grew fewer, and everyone understood without needing to be told why. 1955 carries a quiet gratitude in its pages, an unspoken relief that abundance had returned, even in something as small as a thick book of dresses and tools. Your grandmother mentions this occasionally, though never at great length. Small comments dropped quietly into otherwise ordinary conversations about the current season's catalogue. "It's so much thicker now," she says once, flipping through pages with something like quiet wonder, remembering years not too far behind this one when the same book arrived considerably slimmer, certain materials scarce, certain items simply absent from its pages entirely. You ask her once, gently, what those years had actually been like, and she considers the question for a long moment before answering, her finger still resting lightly against the current catalogue's thick pages. "Rationed," she says simply, though the word carries more weight in her voice than its brevity might suggest. Certain fabrics harder to find, metal saved for other purposes. The whole country, she explains, learning to want less and to wait longer for reasons that mattered more than any single family's individual preferences. She describes, briefly, ordering what she could during those particular years, adjusting expectations considerably, understanding that whatever the catalogue offered reflected a whole nation's shared sacrifice, rather than any simple failure of supply. "You didn't complain," she says, not because complaining was forbidden exactly, but because everyone understood, without needing extensive explanation, that certain comforts simply needed to wait until larger, more urgent matters had been properly addressed. Looking now at the current, considerably thicker catalogue spread across the table, you sense a different quality to its abundance than you might have noticed without your grandmother's brief explanation. This is not simply a catalogue, you realise, but also a kind of quiet testament to recovery, to normalcy gradually restored. Page after page of the ordinary abundance so many families had gone without for years not so very long ago. Your grandmother turns a page now, showing an assortment of household fabrics in colours and patterns you had never thought to consider remarkable, until she mentions, almost offhandedly, how limited fabric choices had been during those leaner years, certain dyes simply unavailable, certain patterns abandoned entirely in favour of whatever basic, practical options remained. This variety, she says, gesturing toward the current page's rich array of choices, this is something worth appreciating properly, not simply taking for granted. You find yourself looking at the catalogue slightly differently now, this ordinary seasonal book suddenly carrying a little more weight than it had moments earlier. The abundance filling its pages, the variety of choices available across every section, represents something considerably larger than simple consumer convenience. It represents, in its own quiet way, a return to normalcy that an entire generation had waited through years of genuine hardship to finally see restored. Your grandmother closes the catalogue gently after this brief conversation, her expression thoughtful rather than sad, more grateful than nostalgic. "We're fortunate now," she says simply, "to have this kind of choice again." You nod, understanding a little better now why she sometimes lingers longer than expected over even the most ordinary pages, why a simple set of mixing bowls or a modest length of fabric seems to hold slightly more significance for her than it might for someone who never experienced its absence. This quiet undercurrent of gratitude, you realise, runs beneath the whole family's relationship with the catalogue, though rarely discussed directly except in these occasional brief moments when your grandmother's memory surfaces naturally within ordinary conversation. 1955's abundance did not arrive by accident, nor should it be taken entirely for granted. It arrived instead through years of collective patience and sacrifice, through a whole country's willingness to want less for a while, so that eventually choice and comfort might return more fully for everyone. And this ordinary catalogue, thick now with possibility, carries that quiet history within its pages, whether or not anyone pauses to remember it beyond these brief, thoughtful moments shared occasionally between generations. It is years later now, in this same imagined evening, and the catalogue eventually finds its way into younger hands entirely, a niece or a grandchild flipping through pages that feel both foreign and familiar. They ask questions you don't always have simple answers for, and in trying to explain, you realise how much of your own life is folded quietly into those old, worn pages. You find yourself now in the position your own grandmother once occupied, sitting beside a child who has never known a world without instant ordering, without goods arriving within days rather than weeks, watching her small fingers turn these old, brittle pages with the same careful curiosity you once brought to this exact activity so many years earlier. She asks you why anyone would wait so long for something they could simply buy immediately elsewhere, and you find yourself pausing, searching for words that might properly convey something that feels, in this moment, difficult to fully explain. It wasn't just about the waiting. You tell her finally, though the waiting mattered too in its own particular way. It was about this, you say, gesturing toward the whole ritual surrounding the catalogue itself, the whole family gathering together to look through these same pages, debating together what to order, saving together toward whatever eventually arrived. She considers this explanation seriously, her young face thoughtful in a way that reminds you suddenly, powerfully, of your own childhood self considering these same pages decades earlier. You show her the section your own grandmother once favoured, the housewares and kitchen tools, explaining how differently people once approached these ordinary objects, valuing them not simply for their function, but for how faithfully they serve a daily life across many years of steady use. She listens carefully, though you can see she struggles somewhat to fully imagine a world where such patient consideration felt necessary rather than merely charming. You flip together toward the toy section, and here her interest genuinely sharpens, recognizing perhaps something more universal in children's excitement over toys, regardless of how many decades separate her own experience from yours. She points toward an illustration of a tin drum, laughing slightly at its old-fashioned simplicity, though you tell her about your own younger brother's excitement over an almost identical toy, describing how he had tested its sound immediately upon unwrapping, filling the whole kitchen with imperfect, joyful noise. This story seems to land more meaningfully with her than your earlier explanations, this small, specific memory carrying more weight than any general description of how things used to work. She asks more questions after this, genuinely curious now, wanting to know what else you remember, what other small moments from these old catalogue seasons still linger clearly enough in your memory to be shared with her properly. You find yourself, over the following hour, sharing memory after memory. The family debates around the kitchen table, your mother's careful fabric selection, your grandmother's quiet preference for practical housewares, the small yellow coin jar that gradually filled week after week until finally emptying into whatever the family had chosen to order that particular season. Each memory, once spoken aloud, seems to surprise you slightly with how vividly it still lives within you, how thoroughly these old, seemingly ordinary rituals shaped something meaningful within your understanding of family and patience and quiet, collective anticipation. Your niece listens to all of this with growing interest, though you sense she's absorbing these stories more as history now than as anything she might personally experience firsthand. This is simply how generations work, you suppose, watching her young face carefully as she considers everything you have shared. what felt like ordinary, unremarkable life to you becomes, for her, a story worth hearing, a window into a world that has already passed beyond anything she will ever directly know herself. By the time you finally close the catalogue together, setting it carefully back onto whatever shelf currently houses your family's small collection of keepsakes, you feel a particular satisfaction in having passed this piece of memory forward properly. The catalogue itself may seem to her generation little more than a curious relic, evidence of a slower, more patient way of living that has since given way to considerably faster, more convenient alternatives. But the stories folded within its pages, the patient waiting, the shared family deliberation, the quiet, careful attention paid toward choosing well rather than simply choosing quickly, these feel worth preserving regardless of whether the specific catalogue itself remains relevant to how anyone actually shops anymore. You watch her carry the catalogue carefully toward the shelf herself now, treating it with a gentleness that suggests she has absorbed, at least a little, some sense of why these old pages still matter to you. And in that small, careful gesture, you sense something valuable has been successfully passed forward. Not simply an old book of outdated merchandise, but something considerably more meaningful, a quiet appreciation for patience, for family, for the particular satisfaction found in wanting carefully and waiting well, regardless of how many decades separate her own childhood from the one you're only now finishing describing to her. Before you ever open to a single page, there is the cover itself, painted rather than photographed, a scene of impossible warmth, a family gathered beneath autumn leaves, or a mother pressing a hand gently to her child's shoulder in front of a gleaming stove. You linger there sometimes longer than you mean to, simply looking at the cover before you ever turn it over. The artist who painted these covers each season remains anonymous to you, someone working somewhere in an office you'll never see, tasked with capturing an entire year's worth of hope in a single illustrated scene. You've always found something quietly remarkable in this, the way a painted image can promise more than any photograph inside ever quite manages to deliver, softer around the edges, more idealized, closer to a memory than a fact. This season's cover shows a young couple standing beside a car parked in front of a modest, tidy home, autumn trees framing them in warm oranges and reds, the whole scene bathed in a golden afternoon light that no actual afternoon has ever quite managed to replicate. You trace your finger along the illustrated woman's dress, admiring how carefully the artist rendered its folds, the exact shade of blue chosen deliberately to suggest both practicality and quiet elegance. Your mother notices you studying it and pauses beside you for a moment. She has her own history with these covers, remembering ones from years past with a particular fondness people reserve for images that once represented something aspirational to them. I remember the one with the little girl and the puppy, she says, describing a cover from years earlier with such specific detail that you understand these illustrations have their own quiet permanence in memory, separate entirely from whatever merchandise waited inside that particular season's pages. There is something instructive in comparing the cover against the actual contents further inside, you realize, flipping back and forth between the painted promise and the photographed reality. The cover always suggests a life slightly more polished than any single purchase could actually provide, though somehow this doesn't feel like deception exactly, more like aspiration rendered honestly as aspiration, an artist's careful attempt to capture not what the catalogue contains, but what owning its contents might eventually feel like. You wonder sometimes about the models chosen for these covers too, whether they are professional artist models or simply ordinary people selected for their wholesome, approachable faces. There is a sameness to them across the years, you have noticed, a kind of universal, gentle expression that seems designed to suggest contentment without excess, comfort without extravagance, exactly the quiet aspirations your own family holds each season while turning through these pages. Your father, passing through the room, glances at the cover briefly before offering his own small observation. "They always make it look easier than it is," he says, not unkindly, simply noting the particular gap between illustrated promise and actual daily effort. You nod, understanding what he means, though you also sense no real cynicism in his comment, only the plain, practical wisdom of someone who has learned to appreciate a beautiful image without mistaking it for reality. The cover's colours have already begun to fade slightly by the time the catalogue reaches your household each season, some quality of the printing process never quite holding its full vibrancy for the entire duration the book remains in circulation. You have grown fond, in a strange way, of this gradual fading, watching the once brilliant autumn red soften slowly into something gentler by the time winter finally arrives, the cover itself aging alongside the household's slow progression through its pages. By the time a new catalogue arrives to replace this one, its own fresh cover bright with whatever new illustrated promise the coming season holds, the old cover has become something closer to a keepsake, its colours muted, its corners worn soft from months of handling. You sometimes save a particularly favourite cover, tearing it carefully away before the rest of the catalogue meets its more humble final purpose, tucking it into a drawer where it remains, a small private reminder of a season's worth of careful looking, wanting, and eventually receiving. It is raining steadily outside, the kind of grey afternoon that keeps everyone indoors longer than usual, and the catalogue becomes, for a few hours, the entire world. You spread it open across the rug in the front room, rain tapping softly against the window glass, and let the whole afternoon slip by one unhurried page at a time. The house feels smaller on days like this, everyone gathered closer together than usual, driven inward by the weather, rather than any deliberate plan. Your mother sits nearby mending a torn hem, your father reads the newspaper in his usual chair, and you stretch out on your stomach across the rug, chin propped in your hands, the catalogue spread open in front of you exactly at the pace your curiosity demands. Outside, the rain falls steadily against the roof, a soft, continuous rhythm that seems to slow down time itself, making the whole afternoon feel longer and more spacious than an ordinary sunny day might have allowed. There is nowhere else to be, nothing pressing enough to interrupt this particular stretch of unhurried browsing, and you find yourself lingering over pages you might otherwise have passed quickly on a busier day. Your younger sister eventually joins you on the rug, settling in close enough that you share the same page between you, her small finger tracing alongside yours as you turn from the dresses toward the toys, then back again toward the kitchen section. Neither of you find particularly interesting, but pause over anyway, simply because there is no reason to hurry past it. The lamp in the corner casts its warm light across the rug despite the grey afternoon outside, and somewhere in the kitchen your mother has something simmering on the stove, its faint, comforting smell drifting through the house and mixing with a papery scent of catalogue pages spread open in front of you. This combination, rain against the window, something warm cooking nearby, the catalogue's endless pages waiting to be explored, feels like its own particular kind of contentment, uncomplicated and complete. Your father glances over occasionally from behind his newspaper, offering small comments when something on the page catches his attention, despite his own reading. "That's a fine-looking axe," he murmurs once, though he makes no move to actually mark the page, simply appreciating it from a comfortable distance the way rainy afternoons seem to encourage, admiration without urgency, interest without any real need for action. You reach the toy section eventually, and your sister's attention sharpens considerably, her finger pressing more firmly against certain pages than others, though today there is no real purpose behind this browsing beyond simple pleasure. Nobody is filling out an order form this particular afternoon. This is purely recreational looking, the kind reserved specifically for days when the weather itself seems to insist on nothing more productive than quiet, unhurried imagining. The rain outside shows no signs of stopping, and you find yourself grateful for this, understanding somehow that a sudden clearing sky might have pulled everyone back outside toward more active pursuits, ending this particular stretch of contented indoor stillness sooner than you would like. For now, though, the grey afternoon continues steadily, and the catalogue remains spread open before you, page after page still waiting to be explored at whatever unhurried pace this rainy day allows. Your mother finishes her mending eventually and joins you both on the rug, her own interest drawn toward the household section. You and your sister passed over earlier without much attention. She points out a particular set of dishes, describing briefly how they might look arranged on the good shelf in the dining room, and for a while the three of you simply exist together in this shared, quiet activity. No urgency attached to any of it beyond the simple pleasure of looking together. By the time the rain finally begins to ease outside, the afternoon light shifting subtly brighter behind the grey clouds, you realise hours have passed in what felt like considerably less time, the whole stretch of afternoon absorbed entirely into this unhurried shared browsing. Your sister has fallen half asleep beside you, her head resting against your arm, the catalogue still open to whatever page had last held her interest, before her eyes finally grew too heavy to stay open any longer. And you remain there a moment longer yourself, unwilling quite yet to close the pages and return fully to whatever ordinary business waits once the rain finally, entirely stops. So that is what it was, ordering from the Sears catalogue in 1955, not a dramatic story, just a thick book on a kitchen table, a pencil worn soft at the tip, a jar of coins filling slowly on a shelf. A family leaning close together under lamplight, turning pages, weighing wants against needs, saving towards something worth waiting for. Think about them tonight, the people who lived this. Your mother running her thumb along a fabric swatch, your father muttering prices under his breath, doing the quiet math that kept a household steady, your grandmother lingering longest over the plainest pages because she understood better than anyone that the ordinary things, the mixing bowl, the apron, the wooden spoon, are the ones that hold a life together, one uneventful morning at a time. They didn't think of themselves as patient. They did not think of themselves as anything in particular. They were simply living the best way they knew how, with what they had. Maybe that is worth carrying forward, just a little of it. The next time something you want arrives instantly without a single day of waiting, take a moment anyway. Let yourself want something slowly for once. Let a decision take an evening instead of a minute. There is a kind of sweetness in that patience that we have mostly let go of, and it is still there, waiting if you ever care to reach for it. History is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a catalogue on a kitchen table, and a coin jar on a shelf, and a whole family leaning in close over the same open page. And that was enough. That has always been enough. So let the lamp dim now. Let the page finally close. Wherever you are tonight, may you feel the same quiet, unhurried comfort those kitchens once held. Good night.